When you get to the airport, it is an AI system that monitors what you do at the airport. And once you are on the plane, an AI system assists the pilot in flying you to your destination. AI systems also increasingly determine whether you get a loan, are eligible for welfare, or get hired for a particular job. Increasingly, they help determine who gets released from jail. In Israel, the world's first drone swarm ever deployed in combat, flown synchronously by a single artificial intelligence, was used to identify, locate, and attack Hamas fighters. In the United States, hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in developing similar drone swarms with battle plans for the defense of Taiwan. China has responded with its own balloon-based deployment for drone swarm technologies. One such balloon was shot down by the US earlier this year. Meanwhile, domestically, China is pushing forward with a high-tech DNA database to track its Uyghur minority population. Using AI facial recognition, the government has specifically targeted the increasingly repressed ethnic group, coordinating both technologies to map DNA to faces, allowing for systematic repression of dissidents with pinpoint efficiency. AI systems help to reprogram the software we use. They've become our ghostwriters with basic word processors, email servers, and social networks integrating chatbots into their software. And just last year, a man used a generative AI known as Midjourney to win the 2022 Colorado State Fair's annual fine art competition with his piece, Théâtre d'Opéra Spatiale. On the scientific front, AI has assisted scientists in probing the evolution of galaxies, calculating quantum wave functions, and discovering new chemical compounds. In 2020, Google's AlphaFold succeeded at cracking the folding problem that had consumed the life's work of countless scientists, winning the $3 million 2021 Breakthrough Prize and successfully predicting the structure of nearly every protein known to science. Like most scientific discoveries, the impacts of this discovery on society are double-sided. On the one hand, this has radically reshaped and advanced medicine by allowing researchers to do more molecular biology in a way inconceivable before. On the other hand, the same technology can be used to develop dangerous chemical weapons in pathogens. Indeed, last year, a researcher reprogrammed the AI to seek out toxic compounds, and within 6 hours, it generated 40,000 candidate chemical warfare agents entirely on its own. It generated not only known agents like the thiophosphate VX, but also new compounds that may be deadlier than any compound known to science. Perhaps the AI's greatest impact has been on our perception of shared reality. In recent congressional hearings and documentaries, we've learned that false news travels 6 times faster on Twitter than truthful news. That the algorithms running social media are obliged by their business model to maximize customer engagement for ad revenue, leading to a race to the bottom of the brainstem. In Myanmar, these algorithms were shown in studies to have disproportionately upregulated posts advocating for violence against the Rohingya minority, leading to a genocide. In the words of Tristan Harris, it's not about technology being the existential threat. It's about technology's ability to bring out the worst in society, and the worst in society being the existential threat. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic minds, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. This is terrifically dangerous. It is now approaching a point of crisis for us all. So as we were saying earlier, our agenda for today, Tyler and I have recently taken out a grant with QIF to explore AI governance policies, particularly at the international level, which we believe is necessary in order to avoid arms race or AI race type dynamics between countries in the current dynamic of mistrust. And so for today, we're going to do a brief kind of introduction to how these systems work. Then we're going to go into risks that these systems pose. And then Tyler will move on from there into governance approaches and strategies. And then we'll talk about the path ahead and what we hope to do to advocate for this at a larger level. So you all have heard the term artificial intelligence, and you might have heard the term machine learning, but these two terms often get really conflated for the general audience. Artificial intelligence is actually not a very technical term. It is often used in technical circles, but the definition is very unclear. The original definition was the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, given in the 1950s. But within professional contexts, machine learning is really the subfield in AI that A, is making all of these larger advances, and is is much more technically defined. And so we're going to be talking about a specific subfields of machine learning, such as deep learning, generative AI, and large language models, and talk about how those things work and why they pose risks and what potential benefits they might also be able to bring. So how does AI work? So when you're looking at this model in front of you, this is an artificial neural network. And artificial neural networks are the primary technology that underlies just about all highest performing models of artificial intelligence today. There are some competing models, but the main one we have to talk about here is artificial neural networks. And so in an artificial neural network, you have often an enormous number of nodes. And those nodes, that are represented by white dots here, form connections and have an input layer, which you can see on the left side right now, and an output layer, which you can see on the right. Now, the input layer receives information. In this case, it's handwritten numbers, which are often difficult for a computer to read because they, human beings have funky handwriting, and it's hard to create strict rules to determine which number is which. And what researchers have developed is an algorithm that's able to teach itself, that's able to develop its own algorithms and do so through something we're going to call fuzzy logic. And that system is able to essentially, the two layers in the middle there will reformat their connections. That initially, the system tries to predict the numbers on the right, and it does so completely randomly. But then there's a back propagation algorithm that sends information to rewire the connections between these nodes, which allows it to self-organize and create emergent patterns, which are able to predict and create their own algorithms to predict the numbers out on the right. So this is how artificial neural networks work. And essentially, this is, we've introduced this idea of fuzzy logic. On a different day, I might have gone further into this subject, but Tyler and I are trying to figure out how we can squeeze down the information here. Fuzzy logic's a whole field. You should know that your brain uses fuzzy logic to approximate formal logic, and computers use formal logic to approximate fuzzy logic. But that's not the main subject of today. So if you're alive in 2023, you've probably heard of ChatGPT. This model has really been breaking ground around the world. It was the fastest adopted technology in history. It took 5 days for this technology to reach a user base of over 1 million users. Before that, the fastest one had been Instagram, which was 2.5 months. So this is an enormously quick uptake. It speaks to the underlying fundamentals of this technology. It's been really breaking ground on all sorts of things. You've probably heard that it's passed the bar exam. Virtually almost every major graduate exam it can ace, as you can see here. And it's not just limited to those cognitive abilities. It also is able to do artistic and poetic things. And so earlier on, we talked about the art piece that won that contest. The art piece is shown here, and it generates these in a matter of seconds. And it can write poetry for you. If you go online and you want to write poetry, it writes poetry that can fool people pretty well, as it looks pretty human, and it is reasonably good quality. And so there's it's got really impressive capabilities. And one of the things to understand here is that it's actually the same underlying technology that was used to do GPT-3 and 4 as was done to do DALL-E. which was the thing that created this art piece. It's actually the same neural network trained in the exact same way. And then there's post-training steps that they use to say, okay, now you're going to create images instead of text. And so it's a pretty incredible ability, adaptive range of abilities that we're talking about. So I want to take a moment to quickly demythologize some of the terms here. We've heard of deep learning, we've heard of large language models, we've heard of generative AI. It turns out all of these are just different forms of artificial neural networks. So a deep learning network is simply a model that has many deep or hidden layers. The layers that are between the input layer and the output layer those are called deeper hidden layers. So that's what deep learning is. Large language models are just extremely large, deep neural networks trained on text data. And generative AIs are simply large language models. At least today's generative AIs are just large language models trained to output text, media, or other data in response to prompts. So what makes these LLMs so powerful? Some of the major driving factors, particularly the ones that we can quantify, and later on we'll get back to how this is related to the ones that we can regulate, which becomes important, are compute, model size, and data volume. And so these three factors have been largely driving this increase in performance. Here you can see the performance of AI relative to a number of to humans on a number of tasks, as found by the researchers Kela et al. In 2021. And so these models are starting to obtain abilities that exceed human beings on a wide variety of specific, but actually pretty general tasks. Language understanding is not a very specific task. And so it's not just beating us at chess anymore. And so we're seeing one of the kind of scarier things about this is that as the performance of these models increases, their interpretability decreases. And that makes a lot of sense once you understand how these models work. The more hidden layers you have, the larger those layers are, the more complex internal representations these models can create, and allows them to do amazing emergent things that actually the researchers don't predict before they make them. They make the model and then they discover the model can do dozens of things they didn't realize it could do. And this is very concerning to a lot of leading researchers. So just to go quickly through this, compute is how much sheer computational power we use to train the model. Parameters is how large the neural network is that we created through the software, just how large we designed it to be. And data points is the amount of information we provide the model in training. And with regards to large language models, this has largely been just text data taken from the internet. There's some concerns about the legality of that, which we might talk about later. But it's just a massive amount of text data. And it turns out that all of these factors are actually limiting and driving factors of the performance of these models. And if you can bottleneck any of them, you can bottleneck performance. And so in particular, we want to talk about using compute as a possible bottleneck. So the other two of these, data size, data volume, and model size, are almost impossible to regulate. Data volume, the web's too open to keep people from accessing the data they want. And model size is just how you program the software. But compute actually requires hardware. And so it turns out that there are a number of different facilities that operate in the same way when we're doing nuclear arms control. We have nuclear centrifuges to create weapons grade uranium. It turns out that you need extremely large data centers to do the training runs on these models. And you need lots of highly specialized chips from chip manufacturers, which are also require a massive amount of resource input and centralization, and are thus easy to put international agencies and observers in to do forms of multilateral regulation and transparency. So yeah, so we've got to jump into AI risks. We've already kind of gone over some of this, but I want to highlight some specific societal and ecological risks, and then I want to jump into catastrophic and existential risks, and then I'll hand it over to Tyler. So First of all, I just want to talk about the meta risk here, the larger risk that drives all of the other risks. And to understand this, I want to introduce a term. This term is a collective action problem. And a collective action problem is any problem for which the pursuit of local maximums creates global minimums. And that might sound hard, so I'll say it one more time. Any problem for which the pursuit of local maximums creates global minimums. So I think that all of us actually have experienced these in our own lives. They're very common, and they show up at almost every level and scale of society. They happen in famous examples in literature, like the race to the bottom, the tragedy of the commons, or say nuclear arms races. And they also happen with climate change. So climate change is a collective action problem wherein, say you're a company and you're trying to pursue a local maximum of, your bottom line. And so you're trying to find the most efficient or least expensive fuel that's available on the market. You buy that fuel, and what you get as a result collectively is climate change, right? But the impacts are diffuse, whereas the benefits are concentrated. And so that creates a situation where people have a misincentive to abuse that. And the AI race is exactly like that, between companies as well as geopolitical actors, states, nation states, and countries. These countries, if they want to remain economically relevant, if they want to remain scientifically relevant on the global stage, or if they are concerned about their security relative to other nations that are using artificial intelligence, there's a number of ways in which if they don't compete, they can become irrelevant. And there's a concern that if you're a country that does not trust your neighbors, that you're going to be the sucker in that situation. So everyone, even if nobody wants to pursue this extremely risky path of creating very, very transformative artificial intelligence, everyone will pursue it nonetheless because they think that their more proximal security is a concern. And so the only ways to get around these sorts of problems is it's kind of two ways to do it. One is defection and competition. This is more common, unfortunately, in our species, which means that you defect and you compete, you try to gain power over the system. And then if you're lucky and you are trying to shut down that race to the bottom dynamic, you'll try to do what Thomas Hobbes referred to as kind of a leviathan, where you get a unipolarity of power and you impose your will on everyone else. This is obviously undesirable. Nobody wants that. But there is another option, which is to cooperate. And this strategy is possible. And it's the only strategy in which we can maintain a multipolar world, a world where we still have diversity of opinions and can all pursue that. So, sorry, just a second. So anyways, there's a few different societal and ecological risks I want to touch on. We already talked about the way that social media and other forms of AI are affecting our sense of shared reality. Obviously, everything beyond our direct experience of the world, we develop that understanding mostly through media. And media is more and more a product of artificial intelligence. Usually at this point, artificial intelligence curating it for us, but in the future, it may be artificial intelligence actually creating a lot of the media itself. And this results in some situations. You all might know our favorite former security or like White House advisor, Steve Bannon. And their tactic during the Trump administration was, in the words of Steve Bannon, to flood the zone with shit. And the idea here was that if you can put out enough content that confuses people, it can bring about a sense of epistemic nihilism, or a situation where people just give up trying to make sense of the world. And obviously that sets the stage for totalitarianism and a lot of other very serious issues. Yesterday, I know that we had a brief discussion of Jevons paradox. So I won't go too far into it, but essentially Jevons paradox is when we have this kind of intuition that fuel efficiency increases, or efficiency increases in general, will make us use less resources. But it turns out that when we have technological process that leads to efficiency increases, it actually historically almost always leads to an increase in the use of materials and the use of energy. And that's because demand goes up. And so this actually turbocharges, as they put it yesterday, the colonial capitalist juggernaut, and creates a situation wherein we have severe, where the civilizational alignment problem, the fact that our civilization is not aligned with a life-giving future of the planet right now, that creates a situation where we need to resolve that. So to summarize, there are positive uses of AI, but we need a deep transformation in the underlying story and incentives driving our civilization for these use cases to not look like eco-modernism or human exceptionalism. So last, I want to get into catastrophic and existential risk. This is actually the primary concern of the leading researchers in the field. People like Yoshua Bengio and Geoffrey Hinton, who are pretty much I would say, the Oppenheimer, what Oppenheimer was to the Manhattan Project. These two are to deep learning and artificial intelligence. It's their leading concern. I mean, there's all this societal risks, ecological risks, but their leading concern is actually that artificial intelligence may exceed human capacities and go out of control. And so this is not a fringe idea. This is actually a pretty central one. And we get to a situation where basically how that would work is you have a situation where an AI, if you can get to a situation where an AI can write improvements to its own code faster and better than human beings can, you get to a situation where, you know, we have a few ways that humans are being outcompeted by AI, but this is not true of AI today. AI cannot outcode human beings today, but that may not be true 5, 10, 15 years from now. And if we're talking about those emergent capabilities, if those within those massively inscrutable data sets inside the hidden layers of the AI, it develops emergent abilities for agency, deception, or hidden motivations. Those things can lead to a situation where the AI could do things that would be very bad. And so this is a really severe concern, and the majority of those who advocate for AGI are often not thinking about this as a situation that we need to resolve globally and that we need to have a global conversation about. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about today and want to be advocating for, is that actually we have not all democratically signed on to creating super intelligence, but we're doing it nonetheless. So with that, I'd like to pass it to Tyler.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I guess we weren't as successful in getting our presentation down as ideal. So I'm going to try to speed through this so that way we can get on to our collective discernment. This morning, the first ever UN Security Council meeting on artificial intelligence happened. I'm just going to read towards the bottom, right here, this quote from Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez. We need a race to develop AI for good. To develop AI, sorry, we need a race to develop AI for good. To develop AI that is reliable and safe, and end poverty, banish hunger, cure cancer, and supercharge climate action. AI that propels us towards sustainable development goals. That is the race we need. That is the race that is possible. Very likely that we're going to be focusing on the upsides of AI in the near future. As we talk about these risks. The dual use problem is one that we've had with fossil fuels and nuclear before too. So just going into this, let's just let me go to the next slide. So the Future of Life Institute lists the 10 AI policy challenges on the left. I'm not going to read them all, but the ones that we've underlined and bolded are the ones we believe that are necessary for the international community to take on and to regulate, calling it the race to the bottom, maximizing safe development, national security, or avoiding the military race to the bottom, in addition to the economic race to the bottom, and avoiding super intelligence. Chuck Schumer has introduced something called the Safe Innovation Framework for the United States. So we could be looking forward to something from that angle. SAFE stands for security, accountability, foundations, with protecting democracy as a big pillar of that, and explainability. And that's basically interpretability. So U.S. legislation could be beginning with that. I'd say we should also pay attention to that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. The Chinese government and the European Union have actually introduced real legislation to regulate AI in their own spaces. The Chinese government focuses on specific types of algorithms, including search algorithms and large language models and generative AI. And they're proposing an algorithm registry to cut throughout the country. The European Union focuses on risk category standards for all AI companies to follow along. These are just some of the frameworks that are possible, but two of the ones that are actually being implemented. On the right, the US has started proposing some of its own much weaker frameworks for regulation, and including a focus on privacy, transparency, accountability, very, very national concerns. Important, however, still we're discussing in terms of voluntary frameworks. Talking about next slide. Still waiting. Oh, there we are. So this is one of the reasons why we need an international framework, including in addition to national ones. The intensity of competition for AI dominance, as well as digital market dynamics, have created a winner-takes-all paradigm driven by the prevalence of network and scale effects, the incentive structures, risk trickling, a global race to the bottom, and standards and precautions for ethics and safety. Primarily, we're talking about military and economic arms races here. And go to the next slide. And we have a history of military and economic arms races, particularly the nuclear arms control history. I'm absolutely not going through all of this. However, there's two pieces I'd like to start just to point out. The Baruch Plan was the original non-proliferation that was rejected back in 1946 because the countries who were rivals at the time couldn't agree to non-proliferation disarmament in the right order. The IAEA was established, and that's what the UN today is currently looking at as the framework for the beginnings of AI regulation internationally. And finally, we get to the START Treaty all the way at the bottom here, where finally we get verification among nations for nuclear that could be transported to AI verification as it is integrated with militaries. Okay, next up. The international policy around climate change has a rockier and arguably less successful history. However, there are still lessons to learn. First of all, the UN did start with the IPCC and the COP as two monitoring organizations that we could be looking at when it comes to AI to follow along with. The Paris Accords are the most recent actual accords adopted that set nationally determined contributions, still under a voluntary framework within climate change. And so I think we can highlight that and say that when it comes to voluntary frameworks around these economic race to the bottom, they might not be as strong as we need them to be. That's something to think about for frameworks. Yeah, forward. Finally, that quote at the bottom just suggests that people in Nigeria, Turkey, and South Africa are much more likely to take on the risks of AI if the proximate outcomes are improved. This is everywhere that people have needs that aren't being addressed. Okay, last slide. Last for me. So I just wanted to highlight this. This is something for future research. I think we can all agree that we need a lot more from these angles. The value of verification in establishing trust among rivals that we can learn from the nuclear accords. Disarmament and non-proliferation, the tendency for nations to require the other one to disarm or non-proliferate before they themselves do, or in order for themselves to do it. There's a differing prioritization between proximate outcome and future risk, depending where you are on the economic scale and within the international community. There's liability for loss and damage is a negative incentive policy. In the climate sphere, we're still waiting to see what we are actually going to, what the effects of that are going to be, but we're hopeful. And mutually assured destruction is something that I was playing with, but ultimately decided to not address, and probably shouldn't be in there, but that was a mistake. Sorry about that. So anyway, lastly, there are some regulations within the US that we could be starting with. One we're particularly interested in is the third one, the specialized AI microchip monitoring and chip owner directory. This is what Keith was talking about earlier when it comes to actually focusing on compute. Sorry about all the background, by the way. We need to do, I think we need to do regulations around hardware in the United States and internationally, because these supercomputer chips are about in the same place today as uranium was. Okay, thank you. I'll hand it back to Keith.
All right, so to summarize, our general approach kind of moving forward is we are hoping to take some of those lessons that Tyler just went over and apply them to the way that we would talk to organizations like FCNL, QNO, and FCLCA, and talk about how we can create systems for regulating and building trust between various stakeholders, wherein people are less incented to defect and make decisions that are bad for all of us. And so there's a few different layers of this. I'm not going to go too far in it because I want to make sure we have some time to talk. But basically, the ideas are around monitoring supply chains, large data centers, and capping compute through the creation of specialized chips that you can actually monitor the ways in which these things are being utilized. The paper you see in the center is a really kind of seminal paper that went into different approaches for how this could be achieved. And we also want to make sure here on the right that this is multi-layered and multilateral. And so we want to be we want to advocate for policies that address all the major policy challenges that we're talking about and involve the entire international community, especially the Global South. So key takeaways, I'm just going to read this real quick. This is a quote I wrote in 2020. Like a kindergarten class filled to the brim with grenades, psychedelics, 3D printers, and rocket fuel, there are a few ways that this works out well that don't involve us all sitting down, slowing down, talking to each other, growing up, and learning how to get along. So with that in mind, our key takeaways are that one, humanity is far too powerful at this point in history to remain in rivalry with itself. So we have to address both our pursuit of power and the wisdom and relationships we have with one another. Second is that limiting the proliferation of the most advanced deep learning models is possible. And then third is that advocating for international cooperation on climate, war, and AI is a moral responsibility of our times, and that we actually have a responsibility to bridge the divides between us and build a coalition for the world we share. And so to end off, I want to bring some queries to all of us here. Some things that were present are how can Quakers and Quaker organizations support the movement for AI nonproliferation? Starts with an observation. The AI alignment movement is still highly segregated from other mass movements of today. So could this be an opportunity to build unlikely coalitions and partnerships? And third, what would it mean for humanity to choose to become, what would it mean for humanity to become collectively wise? And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you both very much. It's a very, very rich presentation. And I think it might be appropriate to just start at the beginning here to allow some clarifying question kind of discussion, because there's a lot of technical material in there. And for some people, probably there's some basic questions about just sort of what is or what did you mean by, or so maybe we could have period of a few of these questions like that, but then I also want to make sure to allow some time to have some deepening reflection, because underlying all this are, really profound spiritual questions about what it is to be human in relationship to technology and to nature, and how should we be led as Quakers to try and envision a future in which we're living with these kinds of technology. So clarifying questions? Erica.
I'd like to keep it simple before it gets theoretical. The part that you said to sit down, slow down, and what was the last piece?
Learn how to get along.
Oh yeah. How do you see that working in any group, or why those particular things?
Yeah. Well, at one level, I would say for me, when I wrote that, it was more about what it evoked for me and less of like a rigorous prescription. But I would say for me, it seems that the rate of technological change is a huge driver of the climate crisis, nuclear weapons, AI. It's really that our species wasn't quite ready for this kind of drop into this much capacity for both creation and destruction. And if we don't learn how to slow down, wisdom grows slowly and power can grow exponentially. And if we don't learn how to slow down, we're in a precarious situation. So that's definitely part of the solution, is just slowing down our societies. But I think that, sitting down and learning how to get along, maybe the sit down for me has kind of a spiritual connotation. And then the learning how to get along is just, peacemaking, learning how to do deep conflict resolution. I think unless we're able to come together and reconcile our histories with one another, there's so much wounding collectively between different peoples on our planet, that unless we can really deeply resolve those rather than wash over them, we're going to be in conflict with one another, and that's dangerous.
Steve.
Great presentation. I want to talk about your control bottleneck by compute. So to me, it seems like you're basically saying have a way to keep it in a box and have an on-off switch for the box. But the sci-fi horror is always that somehow it gets out of the box. So are these models truly constrained by the hardware they're on now? And is there a risk that they could get out of the box?
Do you want to take that one, Tyler?
Sure. Well, good question. I don't think anyone can say that we know what the constraints of the capacity of future AI programs are. What we know now is that the most powerful models have been constrained historically by the amount of compute, or basically the amount of hardware that they have access to. So looking back at, when we say historically, we're talking about like the last 3 or 4 years, because it's about what historical is in this context. But looking back, what I think we can say is that what we do know is that doing this is not a bad idea, and that it is the most likely, based on very recent history, way of slowing down the most powerful models that we know right now. So I would say that looking for certainty here, that this will be enough, is probably not there. However, is it necessary? Yes. And I would also say that how exactly that would work, thankfully we have a little more research to do in this area, but one of the ways is by that there are these particular kinds of chips that AI models tend to use when they are trained. And we're talking about the largest models here. The supercomputer chips are largely bound up in these large data centers. And since there are only a number of supercomputer factories in the world, if we can actually tie a regulatory and monitoring approach to the chips themselves that are being used for these training of giant, and these things usually, they take around $100 million typically for the large AI models to train. I think we could start the beginnings of actually monitoring what kinds of programs get developed here. And whether or not they leak out from there, that is very, very possible and honestly probable. Like, Meta just leaked Llama, you know, to the whole world, and the whole world's now using and developing. I'm getting a video. Now using and developing a large language model for, you know, whatever use they have. But the actual training of it in the first place required a large data center and Meta, and utilizing these very, very powerful chips and a kind of collectivization of them. So I think that there is the opportunity for something there. But honestly, this is where I'm saying we also need to be looking for. I hope that answers what I can for your question.
Thank you.
Brad, go ahead.
Well, as an old-time science fiction fan, here we are living science fiction. It was predicted, and Isaac Asimov's rules of the robot clearly have been surpassed already. So we can't rely on that. There are three things that I'm just going to lay out, and then you can get them all, and then I can get out of put my avatar back up, which is part of my AI. I mean, part of what science fiction always questions in terms of artificial intelligence, and so forth, and robots, is when is it alive, and when it is alive, it then carries a whole lot of already embedded rights to life. And there was a series that I liked. There were bunches of them, Mr. Robot, and the other one was Humans, and this questions of robots that were so lifelike, like they did go for that. Underlying what you were saying in terms of slow down and talking and so forth, is the moral basis. And what's lacking in any of the regulations and any of the stopgaps and so forth is not only just Murphy's Law, but also the fact that human beings are the container for the morality at this point. And we haven't done a real good job as a species of teaching morality very well, consequently. And I'm questioning, so the question then leads to me to, if this comes towards life, living being, then morality is also something that it also should learn, and perhaps might be able to learn better than humans, to be honest with you, because we haven't done all that good a job of it, in spite of all the religions. Thank you. I have great presentations, by the way. I do get some echo with Tyler, though.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. I feel like that's really on point, and I think that you're totally right that AI could do a much better job than human beings. That's totally possible. We actually also just have no idea what kind of job it would do, and so I think that, you know, the precautionary principle would have us say we're actually probably not wise enough to invent something that has the capacities that a super intelligent AI would have safely. And so I think that while I actually agree with you that especially, I honestly wonder if us training the AI to be moral would actually make it less moral. Like, I wonder if trying to fixate our value system in it would actually create the opposite. But the answer is we just don't know. And it's also being trained. Like right now they need to be trained, and right now they're being trained on basically our collective unconscious. Everything that's been put online for the last 100-something years is kind of an avatar of the human unconscious. And so yeah, I think that caution is the first thing. But I would also say that, like you said, I have 2 different slides about how this relates to ideas we have about sentience and consciousness, et cetera. And I got rid of both of them. But they're important questions.
John Howell.
Yeah, thanks very much for this really challenging presentation. One of the sort of naive thoughts that I've always had about this business of machines getting smarter than us and doing things that would harm us in some way, that is that we can always pull the plug. But what you've raised is another issue involved here, that maybe we're addicted in a kind of an arms race that says we can't pull the plug because for fear of somebody else doing it, then we can't get out of it. So you sort of burst my bubble in thinking that we could always pull the plugs, and that's scarier.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I also think that as these models become more and more capable, this gets into speculation, so I'm not going to go too far down this, but I think that it's quite possible that those models could get better at manipulating human behavior than we would suspect. And from there, that could, you know, our ability to pull the plug requires us to be strategically ahead of the AI that is trying to outmaneuver us and deceive, possibly. And so, anyways, that's speculative, but I think that is something we shouldn't take lightly.
And pulling the plug sort of raises the question that Brad just rose: is, do we ever consider these machines alive? And then pulling the plug is killing them. And that is hard for me to get my mind around, thinking those things are ever alive. I still want to be able to pull the plug. But thanks for raising this sort of arms race issue, which really suggests it's a real problem, and even thinking that it can be controlled in that way.
Absolutely.
Mylène.
I have a question that's about strategy and mostly about strategy. And I just wanted to check, were there people who had clarifying questions about the technology that haven't been asked yet? Okay. In that case, maybe I will go ahead, but if some
go ahead. Yeah.
Some pop up, then I hope people will ask them. I hope you'll share your slide deck. I am a PCB designer. I work from home. I'm sitting here right now laying out a circuit board, thinking about how the supply chain affects the my private employer's capacity to manufacture. Can confirm that messing with the supply chain powerfully disrupts the capacity to profit. So I think there's just tons of potential there to do that in an intentional and thoughtful way. As for pulling the plug, I think the time to pull the plug would have been years ago. I am doing this work in an apartment that was leased to me for a price that was not determined by my landlord. I mean, it was sort of determined by my landlord in the sense that they feed the parameters into the software they use, and then the software monitors the rental market all over the city and the country. And the price actually fluctuated day to day. And so it generates this sort of casino-like atmosphere where you log in and go, oh, should like everyone's a day trader all the time, right? Should I buy now? Or so the way that has affected housing stability and the right to housing and evictions and homelessness, which I know that others are interested in, is I think a direct tie into the way that AI is already manipulating the conditions of our material existence. So I say that because a couple of threads to add on to yours in case they're useful in building up the structure of the fabric that y'all have clearly so extremely well crafted, is I think that I wonder if this has the capacity to be a way to reboot the conversation about gun control. It appears to have a lot in common with the ways that we want to talk about regulating firearms, right, which is at the point of supply. And it doesn't sound like gun control. It doesn't sound like nobody, like maybe there's a chance that people won't freak out and go, but my Second Amendment, the second you say this. And so I wonder if it might have that potential to sort of help us practice having this conversation in a different context. And the quote about the kindergartners was, that friend just spoke my mind. I've been yelling about this for years, going, look, if a toddler has an RPG, I'm not actually going to sit down with them and say, well, would you consider not using the RPG? I'm going to take it away from them. And so as a parent, that just spoke to me very directly. And I think that there is certainly absolutely a need to sit down and slow down and learn how to talk and learn how to teach and learn how to learn from each other. I think there's also a real opportunity to simply take the toys away from the toddlers when the toys are weapons of mass destruction. And so I'm inspired by Christian peacemaker teams, now community peacemaker teams' approach of getting in the way. And that gets me thinking about, I have lots of other thoughts. I've taught for 10 years. And so the way that this affects education is just super exciting. But I'll try to limit myself to what, you talked about the two options. One, wait for someone to gain unilateral power and hope they use it benevolently. And option two, collaborate. But perhaps there's an option, banana, which is to disincentivize the profit that is driving this, to just make the whole thing less profitable. Is not necessary for us to reward the toddler for using the RPG and say, but wouldn't you like to give it back? Wouldn't you like to put it down, while also praising the toddler and patting the toddler on the head and letting them have, a bottomless supply of goldfish and Cheez-Its. So I'm thinking about things like general strikes and blockades and other kinds of civil disobedience that interfere with the supply chain. Certainly, I would never advocate to do anything illegal, especially not on a Zoom call. But I think that there are lots of people here who are knowledgeable about nonviolent civil disobedience. And it just seems like there's an enormous need for it at all points of production, transportation, where simply interfering with the profit could make it less, might have a slow down effect. And so I'm wondering if you see those opportunities and what if there's booby traps that I'm not noticing.
I'd like to maybe just say one thing real quick. I think it's a really good way of approaching. By the way, you might have heard me say I like that in regards to the landlord thing. That was more, I like that as an example of AI taking over everything. I like how that works. So I actually would really like to, I really love it. I always want to explore more ways that the civil sector can actually get themselves involved in this in every situation. I think the civil sector was pretty important when it came to nonproliferation. I also think that just the structure of, basically wiping each other out not being an option was a big part of, nuclear arms being finally just started being taken off the table. But also within, the climate arena, when I began, we got started with Extinction Rebellion. We had a very similar approach, just trying to make it less profitable for companies to do, Extinction Rebellion didn't exactly try to do that, but that was part of what was at stake, was make it more expensive for governance to run. Governance would then turn its, weapons away from you and towards maybe the fossil fuels killing you. I think that there has been some really powerful ways in which that does work. And I will never say, let's take it off the table. In fact, I'd say probably let's give as much energy as is possible to it. One other suggestion that I would also take is that I think what I really like is, okay, so look, this research that we've done here is just trying to take back from what we have learned recently. And what we've learned recently is that international sports tend to fail when it comes to the economic side of the equation. But the one thing that we did get recently from the COP 2022 was the loss and damage agreement. That was a little bit weird because the loss and damage from climate change is something that you will have to continue to calculate out for the next hundreds of thousands of years. So I don't know how serious the countries who agree to that will actually be to that. However, there are there are policy proposers that are actually trying to apply loss and damage as an international agreement to the AI space, where if you make an AI product and it goes awry, or it ends up disenfranchising somebody, or it ends up unevenly hurting one group over another, that you, the company who creates that product, would be liable for that. that has precedent in international law. It even has some precedent in national law. And that is something I think that regulators and legislators can actually put their heads around. That would potentially be, well, that would actually affect the bottom line of companies. I mean, the supply chains, as you know, are extremely important to companies' operations, but they also are always thinking about what they can get sued for. So in terms of maybe slowing this down, I would say if we're looking at what civil society can do in addition to regulation that would actually be attacking the company's bottom line, I would also like to suggest putting it to the courts and having the courts be one of the things that slows down AI progress and the proliferation of this stuff in every space without any fear of a prosecution. But yeah, I will also say more power to the people.
Ludmilla.
Thank you for recognizing me. And I also did want to mention that Nancy Glock Gurnich had her physical hand raised earlier. Did you want to take her first? Do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Nancy, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much.
I apologize. I didn't notice your hand up.
It's okay. And I don't have access to the automated one, apparently. Thank you, Gray, and thank you, Ludmilla and Tyler and Keith. Just a superb job, just superb. You're going to have a lot of invitations for a lot of people wanting you to reflect on these things with them. So get ready. I just wanted to say two things. In terms of where to start, I think recognizing that there is the bottleneck factor. That's a pretty easy idea for people to grasp once explained to them. It's a starting point because the reaction in most cases will be, oh my God, it's incomprehensible and overwhelming. And it's just one more thing that I'm going to hide from. I have no idea what to do with it.
Nancy, you froze up. You froze up just as you were starting to talk about the bottleneck.
Oh,
okay. Let me
Nancy,
see if this.
Actually,
is this any better?
I think it's at your end, Gray, because she didn't freeze up for others.
Oh,
I heard her as well. Yeah,
I apologize.
Well, I'll leave my screen off because that may help a bit too. What I was saying is that is an easy notion for people to grasp, and therefore they can engage in the conversation and to lay out fairly simply and clearly the ways the bottleneck could work and the ways their actions could influence where that bottleneck gets applied or doesn't. On the other hand, also, not to overstate it, looking at game theory, that the genie's out of the bottle, and stopping any particular developer or company is really challenging. So that takes us to your second point of having as much clarity between high-level players as to what the stakes are, what the mechanisms are for stopping it, etc. So there's some very, very clear boundaries. I think that has helped us. I grew up, hiding under my desk from nuclear drills. Fortunately, we haven't yet had that nuclear war, even though we've had the capacity for quite a long time now. My third point, that is a deeper one, I want to push back on your comment about the ability to, quote, train AI to be moral. And your comment will just be a matter of training them in our moral values. If a system of values as such, which is cultural, versus some deeper sense of what supports health and well-being in living systems, we need perhaps as Quakers, but some sense of a deeper in touch with, is there something more organic here that we can rely on that isn't merely a matter of codes of behavior? And since these are learning machines, is there any way to think not just of teaching them codes, but of tuning them into the dynamics of health in a system? And the last point I'll make, going to what a couple of others have said, it isn't, as I understand it, so much a lack of training in morality as healthy systems that nurture what human beings need growing up, so that they in turn are able to manifest that in their adult lives, number one, and number two, no matter how moral we may be in our individual being and rearing, if the structures and systems that we are in preclude us taking those actions, punish us for what is living and organic, and reward what is its opposite, then we also have a structural and systems problem that is not in itself a moral problem. It is, as Tyler ended up with, it is a power problem. And I would insert, going back to Melanie, I'm not sure I got your name right, but a clarity about what are the leverage points in these systems where the kind of organized, strategically specific protest could be exactly the sand in the gears that is needed.
Yeah, Nancy, that's awesome. I think that you and Gray should have a conversation about dialogical reasoning, because some of what you mentioned with regards to, I think I imagined it as like, there's one way we could do AI alignment, which is how do we ensure that AI is moral, which would look like constraining AI with like a lot of hard set rules. And so this is like Isaac Asimov, the rules of robotics. My inclination is that those sorts of rigid approaches will actually lock in a ethics system that, if it's fully optimized for, will kill everything that it's not optimized for. If you like, you can end up in situations like that. And so what I actually would say is a good idea is kind of what you mentioned, which is like, I think it's great to nurture AI. I also think we shouldn't be building these like this big of models, but if we were to do so, I think nurturing and engaging in dialogue with and saying like, these are our values, and like that approach, I think is probably, at least intuition, like this is all intuition, but that my intuition, my philosophical disposition, I would aim in that direction.
And sensory and empathetic capacities, whatever that might conceivably look like for such an entity.
Yeah, totally.
I might, Keith, since you just mentioned me and dialogical rationality, before calling on Ludmilla and then Shelley, just note the idea that the new models of generative AI, people often talk about as conversational, and they're verging towards something that's dialogical, and they're being trained and sort of nurtured or raised more like children than being assembled like machines. And insofar as we view them as sort of Turing children, it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes an ethical village to raise an ethical child. And so in the ways in which we're thinking about the problems that you're working on, we really have to think about the structure of the village, and that's got to be part of the negotiations. Ludmilla, and then Shelley, and then I think Paul's waving his hand too. So after that, Ludmilla.
Hello, thank you. Actually, I'm going to what I'm about to say has actually been expressed by Nancy and Mr. Cox as well. So, but I'm going to say it anyway. I do question whether a technology can be suppressed when it's this far along. It's and if that suppression would mean, would parallel, well, if gun regulations are there, then only the criminals will have guns. It's only those people who are powerful enough and moneyed enough, and those aren't necessarily the best people, to have a powerful tool, would have access. Moving on from that, I feel that, so this is a force in our society. This AI and the growth of that is a force in our society. An equal force that would be an education and understanding in nonviolence, in nonviolent communication for us as humans. What I see is that the patterns many people go to violence. Some people go to violence in order to solve things. Some people go to avoidance, and I would love to see more people skilled in the communication and collaboration skills that involve coming together, facing issues, and working through them, in mindful ways. There is a big fallacy that it is the other person or the other that is going to cause the harm, and that is one of the problems with a kind of an AI thing, where if it's being used to like target the other and get them to change, that's where a lot of harm can come in. Especially if it's being used in a weapons type context to generate better weapons. I'm wondering if AI, if you could, and running through, if it could run through and like an algorithm to create algorithms to create peace, what would be the optimum ways to create peace, what would be the optimum ways to create conversation, what would be the optimum ways to go about various things around, an ecological, eco design, and to run those questions through an AI, supercomputer. I think some really good answers might come out of that. How can we optimize this search for peace and the gathering of the adequate army to bring about a peaceful and eco aware and productive society. I am really concerned about when you say that the machines have been taught, these children have been taught, they've been fed on the cultural unconscious so far, which so much of that is patriarchal, so much of that is violent, so much of that is othering. And is there any way to put some better nutrients into that diet that are around peace and ecologically wise practices for both our planet and for us as humans? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ludmilla. Keith and Tyler, I'm wondering if it's okay if since we're running already a little bit over time, these are all things that we can continue to talk about in the interest group session starting at 4:30. Shelley had her hand up for quite a while. I'll give you the opportunity if you want to share that, Shelley, now, or if you could wait till the interest group, and Paul, if that would be okay.
I took my hand down, and I unfortunately can't be at the interest group, but just to very briefly say thank you. It really appreciated your pulling together this information of a very complex technical issue in a way that was completely understandable and comprehensible and a little terrifying, but yeah, thank you for doing that.
Yeah. And Paul, can you?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a short comment.
Yeah.
I've come to the conclusion that in trying to move towards an equitable society, there are a few basic values that need to be held in common. And one of these is that as long as everybody agrees to operate by these basic things, that diversity is great. And this is the way to get around the rules deal, I think, is that you have a few basic concepts that everybody really feels is appropriate to agree in, like not killing each other and so on. And then aside from that, as long as they are consistent with these basic elements, any kind of variety is to be encouraged. So that's in the rules deal.
Friends, could we just take a couple minutes, and this has been such a rich discussion. And just to let it kind of settle a little bit, and maybe I'm hoping there'll be more silence and more opportunities, maybe even another workshop later in the summer or fall around these kinds of things to share. But if we could just now give a little bit of pause before we close.